Okay, we're going to start now. Thanks all very much for coming for the last session of the workshop. Sorry if I've got my back to you. Do move forward if you want to. So I think one of us will have our backs to all of you at some stage, so apologies for that. So this afternoon we're having much more of a, as you can tell, an open space, more informal session, and it's in three parts. The first is we're going to have a short speech from Prince Nikolai of Montenegro, who lives in Paris. Then we're going to move on to a discussion which is taking us back into the policy, into the strategic realm, so moving beyond individual projects and initiatives and looking more at what's happening at that strategic level to link it back to the talks that are taking place at the moment. Then we're going to have some reflections on where we've got to thus far with the pledge, and then we're going to, it'll be a networking and a book launch, I think, that Marie mentioned. And just to say, we'll have a short break after this discussion bit. So I'm very pleased to welcome Prince Nikolai, who's going to say a few words.
Welcome to you too. So, greetings and fraternity to all of you who have come from the four corners of the earth to be here. It's my honor to speak on behalf of the Petrovich-Njegos Foundation and the Green Culture Network, which we founded in collaboration with NGO Krug, who has led the effort in mobilizing our community into a green culture movement. Today, here, there are no longer princes, heads of states, rulers of the world, rich or poor, young or old, just human beings confronted for the first time since the beginning of civilization with the threat of extinction of the human race. Over these few days, which are so vitally important for our future, you all made the effort to be here, sacrificing your time and money to come and to let your voice be heard and to hear what others have to say. At this 21st conference, the one that many call the last chance, and that I prefer to call the first chance. In fact, we have never been so aware of the urgent need for a profound reorganization of our society. It is precisely this first chance, and those that refuse to do so are, strictly speaking, unhuman beings. The climate, biodiversity, and natural resources are absolute priorities which oblige us to put to one side our rivalities, whether they are ideological, religious, political, or economic. All of us that are here today know that time is not the essence, is of the essence. 2020 and 2030 are important steps, but 2050 is a deadline for us to succeed on this joint exploit, which is essential to us all, no matter who or where we are. We also know that at the end of these conferences that put our world leaders face to face with their responsibilities, nothing more will be done unless there is a global effort by the majority of men, women, but also children, who inhabit and love our planet. This global effort manifests itself through awareness, and this awareness through our words, but also through all other forms of communication and information sharing. This is where art, or rather the arts, culture, or rather cultures in all their different forms, will allow us not only to communicate, but to take communion. it is good and very fitting that this important cultural aspect is present at the COP21, thanks to the instigator of our meeting. Over the following years, we will undoubtedly have the opportunity to meet again and share our outrage, our ideas, and our projects. I would like to propose one such opportunity. Did you know that Montenegro had written the ecological state in its constitution, the following text voted by Parliament the 20th of September 1991? We members of Parliament of the Republic of Montenegro are aware that the protection of nature and the identity of the country which we live and work in has become a foundation of our work. Convinced that our debt towards nature, the source of health and inspiration for freedom and culture, we devote ourselves to its protection by the love that we hold for our offspring and for our future prosperity. In adopting this declaration, Montenegro states its respectful attitude towards nature as an official state policy and asks all people to act wisely by doing all in their power to avoid an environmental disaster. Unfortunately, the essence of these fine words, like many others, turned out to be wishful thinking. There is a lot more to be done. We need more people power and hands-on actions with support from the global expert community to establish a strong footing for this mission in the region and order to accomplish the main aims. But these words remains, and even more so today, the best initiative which could unite the community living in Montenegro and improve their living conditions. Even more so to set an example for the wider Western Balkans community. This is what we are trying to achieve with the Green Culture Initiative and involve other sectors to join, such as business and academia, for a greater impact. This is also an undertaking which will raise Montenegro into the front line in this universal catharsis which we are all hoping for, after other countries like Costa Rica and the Kingdom of Bhutan who have already put these ideas into action. Our proposal is to invite you to come to Montenegro next year with all the friends of the planet for a major global forum for the ecological state, from words to action, by highlighting foreseeable consequences of our lifestyle and production, by promoting the strategies and innovative technologies which could help us to reduce global warming and these consequences, but also to prepare us for environmental disasters which will become more and more frequent in the years to come. If we agree to do it, this Green Forum will not only have an impact on Montenegro but throughout the Balkan regions which are waking up from a political tsunami. It will allow us to create critical mass, allowing politicians backed up by public opinion to recoup, to implement this beautiful project and to show to the rest of the world that in the magnificent word of Naomi Klein, this changes everything. The Green Cultural Network, the foundation that I preside, and our partners in Montenegro are all ready to make every possible effort to organize this event with you and set the scene for making continual and tangible progress. I sincerely hope that we can stay in contact for our different projects, and for this that we can exchange our links, website and email before the end of the forum. In the words of the great Southern Slav poet Petar Petrovich Njegoš, neka bude što biti ne može. Let's make the impossible possible. Thank you for your attention, and I hope to see you one day in Montenegro or everywhere on our lovely planet. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prince Nikolai. That was that's a fantastic rallying cry. So aptly, I think what you've suggested is that the policy that you have as enshrining Montenegro as an ecological state is a policy on paper, and it's not actually happening in reality. And the great challenge to us is how we can help to galvanize that and to galvanize the notion of the ecological state, which is a very nice way of coming back to where we started on the first morning yesterday, which was talking about the role of policy. And so I'm really happy to have 3, perhaps 4 if we're lucky, 4 panelists this afternoon, all of whom have got a particular expertise on policy. We have Jordi Pasquale, many of you will know, he's the coordinator of the UCLG Agenda 21 for Culture, and Jordi led the campaign to include culture as one of the Sustainable Development Goals. Many people led the campaign for the inclusion of culture into the Sustainable Development Goals. One of them was Jordi. So we have Jordi. We also have Justine Simons. Justine Simons is an old colleague and great friend of mine, I confess. She is the chair of the World Cities Culture Forum, a reasonably newly set up body that does what it says, and also is the head of culture in London. And we also have John Crowley, who's the chief of section Research, Policies and Foresight at UNESCO, and with a bit of luck, we'll be joined by Patrick de Georges, who is a philosopher and manager for emerging and strategic ideas, the Ministry of Ecology, Sustainable Development and Energy here in France. And just to kick off the talks, we're going to hear first from Jordi, who's really looking forward to it, I can tell.
Thank you very much, Alison. Thank you very much to the organizers, especially to Marie. My presentation will have three chapters in 10 minutes. In the first one, I will summarize who we are. The second one, I will try to answer the question, what do we need? And the answer will be local networks. And in the third part, I will try to answer the same question, what do we need? And the answer will be global networks. So what we are United Cities and Local Governments, a member-based organization. Cities and local governments from all corners of the world belong to the organization, and local democracy, the improvement of local democracy is our main goal. Development, we understand this is a very difficult concept. We understand development as a people-centered process, and we support policy making, we support cities and local governments in their elaboration of urban policies, and we also advocate for a strong role of cities and local governments in any national and international program that involves cities and local governments. From the very beginning, culture is present in UCLG's program. Agenda 21 for Culture, it was approved in 2004. It is our founding document, the first ever document, declaration on cities, culture and sustainable development. We work with all kinds of cities. To mention a few, those that have been participating in this professional workshop, big cities like Bogotá, Belo Horizonte, Barcelona, Lille Métropole, medium-sized cities, intermediary cities like Angers, but also provinces or departments like Jeju. special greetings to the president of the committee, Catherine Coulen, who is here with us. In the last years, we have invested in the identification of good practices in culture in sustainable development. I think that's in our website, we have 72 good practices translated in all the 3 languages of UCLG, English, French, and Spanish. We organize a summit every 2 years. The first one, in fact, it was organized this year in Bilbao in March, and the second one, we still do not know where, but it will certainly happen during the first months of 2017. We organized an award with the City of Mexico worth 50,000 euros for a local government and 25,000 euros for a standing personality on culture and sustainable development. And I want to say hello here to the winner of the first edition of the award, the City of Belo Horizonte. The jury also mentioned especially the cities of Ouagadougou in Burkina Faso and Hanover in Germany, and other 25 cities were mentioned as good practices. And the second edition of the award will be launched tomorrow. So some of you may wish to have a look to the rules. And to finish with the first part, our narrative. Our narrative is very simple. The triangle you see on the left is what we understand the old triangle of sustainability, the old triangle of sustainable development. That does not explain anymore how the world is working, that it does not explain anymore urban development, it does not explain anymore a human being, the needs and the will of freedoms that we all have. We believe that the square reflects better today's complexities of our societies at a global, national, local, and also individual side. What more is needed? Local networks. From the point of view of our point of view, the point of view of local governments, we need cultural policies that are people-centered and that connect cultural actors, the cultural sector, to democracy and development. We understand that, yes, the agendas of sustainability, the agendas of creativity are very important, but we feel that there is a more robust, more difficult, and wider agenda, which is that of democracy and people-centered development. We, in Bilbao, approved a toolkit, Culture21 Actions, to operationalize culture in sustainable cities with 9 commitments. You may be able to see them on the screen. 9 commitments and 100 actions. And the first commitment, the first one, is cultural rights. Human rights and culture. We do not understand cultural rights as the rights of the sector or as the rights of a group of professionals, but we understand cultural rights as the rights of people to access culture and the rights of people to actively participate in cultural processes. We believe that the agenda on human rights and culture of the UN, with the special rapporteur on cultural rights, Farida Shahid, and her successor, Karima Ben Noun, are very, very important. There are also commitments on culture and the environment, and also another commitment on culture, public spaces, and urban planning. And I believe that many of the projects, programs, and presentations that I have here have a very close relation with these 2 commitments. We are inviting our members to use Culture21 Actions in something like self-evaluation processes that include the local government and the civil society. We understand that culture in sustainable cities is a joint responsibility, local governments and civil society. And we have 2 programs to support this implementation. In cities, a program of leading cities and a program of pilot cities. And we also try to provide visibility to all our members with pages in our website. What more is needed? The third chapter in this presentation, the answer, we need global networks. As a local government umbrella organization, what do we do? Well, from May the 23rd, from May the From May 2013 to September this year, we have participated in the platform of global networks on culture in order to influence the post-2015 development agenda of United Nations, the elaboration of the Sustainable Development Goals. Here, the members of that campaign were civil society organizations such Arterial Network, Culture Action Europe, the Global Federation of Libraries, the International Music Council, and I want to say hello to Celia Fisher here present, the Latin American Network for Social Inclusion, but also this coalition also included the Federation of Arts Councils and Culture Agencies, AFACA, and us, the Committee on Culture of United Cities and Local Governments. And I also want to say hello here to Valeria Marcolin from Culture et Développement, who has followed very closely our work, and also to say hello to Jordi Baltà, who works with us in the Committee on Culture, who has been drafting some of the documents that we all, as a campaign, we have produced. The result, you all know that the Sustainable Development Goals were approved in September this year, now a little bit more than 2 months ago. 17 goals, 169 targets, not a goal on culture, 3 mentions to culture in the preamble, 8 targets that very generously reading the document are related or mention culture, and out of these 8 targets, there is only half explicitly on cultural heritage. I read, strengthen efforts to protect and safeguard the world's cultural and natural heritage. And I say half because I understand the other half is natural heritage. This marginal role of culture is a good picture of where we are. 4 points. First, our narrative is not convincing enough. Second, our connection with other networks is very weak. We are talking to ourselves. We are preaching the converted. Third, we have not a seat, structural seat, a place in the global conversations on culture, in the global conversations in development. There is not a major group of cultural actors, or as we would have liked to have, a major group on organizations concerned to cultural development. And fourth, the United Nations Organization on Culture is not in its best moment. Did not enter the negotiations with a bold, ambitious proposal, and is not providing the thought leadership we all need, we all expect. And what can we do? We have a lot of homework, and we as United Cities and local governments, what we will try to do in the next months, years. We will try to be active in the implementation of the SDGs at the national level, be active in promoting culture in the national development plans. Second, we will try to include culture in the new urban agenda that the United Nations is elaborating to be approved in Quito in October next year. And here I want to say hello to Marco Kusuma Vijaya, who is one of the experts in the policy unit culture and social and cultural framework. And we will try to mainstream culture in all the policy units, not just in the social-cultural framework, but also in public spaces, also in human rights, also in justice, also in security. I think that we, the people concerned to culture, we have to be active in all possible units that are related to urban development. And third point, we will try to shape our next Culture Summit, which will take place in 2017, as a meeting place of all those global networks that are parties to the debate on culture and sustainable development, including, of course, the global cultural networks, but also the non-cultural networks and organizations. What does Greenpeace think about what we are doing? What does Action Aid? What does Amnesty International think about culture in sustainable development? I think that we have not yet asked that question, and we have to ask that question to make our case stronger. We believe that it is the time to build a strong, robust coalition constituency on culture in sustainable development, and I trust that we all will enjoy and we will learn together in this journey. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much, Geordie. Very comprehensive analysis, both of our great weaknesses, but also our strengths, and a rallying cry for the next set of actions. I'd like to bring in Justine now, who's coming at these big strategic questions from a slightly different context, certainly, and I'd be interested in the angle. Here you go.
Thank you, Al. So I'm the chair of an organisation called the World Cities Cultural Forum, and Al has asked me to talk about what we're doing in our global forum to connect ourselves into wider policy, reflecting what we've heard this morning. But I'll just show you a 1-minute video to describe what we do. So just click on it. Give it a go. Sound up. I need the sound up. Let's try that in. Thank you. I'm just going to try and get my presentation up. Can I get some help to someone who speaks French? Put it on the full screen. Show it as full screen. Great, thank you. So, a few weeks ago, it's running on a loop, so I'll take that off. It's gone onto a automatic thing. Sorry. Try that. Okay, let's go again. So, the World Cities Cultural Forum. A few weeks ago in London, we hosted a kind of C40 for culture. Actually, it was a C33, because we've got 33 members, 33 global cities came together for our summit. And those people there, they're the most influential cultural officials from city governments, from Africa, from Asia, Europe, the Middle East, and Africa, and America. And we started 3 years ago, and already our numbers have swelled really from 9 to 33. And we think that's because there's now a recognition that you can't be a successful city in the 21st century without having culture as part of your plan. And just like the C40, we came together to share ideas, to solve problems, and work out how best to embed culture at the heart of urban policy in cities. And for this session, which is about expanding the discourse, I was asked to share what we're doing and to think about where there might be some common ground between culture and sustainability, particularly looking at it through the lens of big urban city policy. So the reason I started with that question, culture and sustainability, is it a forced marriage or a perfect match? Which I thought was an interesting question for us to think about. So I wanted to just start by sharing the story of culture in global cities. It generates billions of cash. This is the British Museum. In London, 8 out of 10 people come to London because of culture. When they come to London, they spend 10 billion euros a year, cultural tourists alone. It breathes life into rundown areas of town. Creative people, they take over disused warehouses and kickstart an urban renaissance in cities. And in a world where we're all drinking the same coffee and buying the same trainers, culture and creativity, it gives cities a unique character and bolsters our international standing. And thinking about health, who would have thought that ballroom dancing cuts dementia by 76%? It builds the skills and confidence of future generations, and of course it costs an absolute fraction of the other big city budgets. And this story is mapped all across the world. In Rio, this is a film program in Rio, taking film into the favelas. New York, they recently built the High Line and kind of regenerated a whole area of Manhattan. Tokyo are developing an ambitious cultural Olympiad to tell their story when they host the Olympic Games in 2020. In London, we've got a big new cultural quarter in our Olympic Park as our legacy from the Games. So culture delivers across all different kinds of government agendas. And often, to really understand the value of something, you have to imagine what it would be like without it. So imagine Paris without museums, London without theatres, Rio without carnival, Barcelona without dance. Clarissa. This is another example of culture as part of urban policy. This is Clarissa in Bogota, has turned what was a crime issue, which was street art and graffiti, into a global flagship, and now the city really owns and promotes artistic work throughout the urban landscape. But let's remind ourselves that life without art would be a series of emails, according to the artist Grayson Perry. So from where we're standing as the World Cities Cultural Forum, it's an absolute no-brainer. We can't see why all cities wouldn't have culture at the heart of their urban policy. It just seems like a really obvious thing to us. But the reality in cities is very different, and the truth is that culture is at risk in most global cities today. And that's because improving transport, boosting the economy, solving crime, building homes, they're all at the top of the agenda in cities. It's these immediate big issues that, of course, get all the attention and the resources. And culture is the thing that gets cut when the budget pressure is on. It's very short-term decision-making, and the risks to cities in the long term of not taking these things seriously they're just easy to brush under the carpet. But these big issues in cities, they bear down on culture. So thinking in London about housing, we're in a crisis in London. Housing is very unaffordable, and what that means for culture is that our creative workforce is struggling. Artists can't afford to live in London at the moment. And we've reached a situation where the average house price is 50 times the average salary of an artist. And in the next 5 years, we'll lose 30% of artist studios. And we've already lost 35% of live music venues in London in the last 8 years. You know, these venues which were the birthplace of rock and roll, punk, dance, they're all disappearing. And public funding is only going down. So we find ourselves in a really strange world where we really know that culture matters on a fundamental level, and it's vital to all big cities if they're to thrive, but it's not embedded in urban policy. It's championed by evangelists, as you were saying, Geordie, but not universally accepted as a priority. So we're in a conundrum. And our conundrum is that, on the one hand, we know the value is exponential. We know that culture is essential to our quality of life in these cities, on this planet, but it's not universally seen as a priority. It's vulnerable to budget cuts, and it's also vulnerable to short-term political cycles, which sounds familiar, I think, in terms of the debates that you've been having over these last few days. And I think there are some parallels here with the world of sustainability. So finally, I just wanted to share with you how we're trying to tackle this. Because as everyone here knows, the earth without art would just be So our priority really is around we've got three action areas. Firstly, proof. Secondly, a crack team. And thirdly, leadership. So we need proof, because without having hard data and evidence, we can't make the arguments. And so every 3 years we publish this, which is the World Cities Culture Report, and it's the most comprehensive data report tracking the value of culture in global cities. So we use that to make our argument to big city governments. The second thing is we are assembling a crack team of cultural policy experts through our network, and we're sharing what we can do. So Toronto and London have been sharing what to do about creative workspace. Stockholm, Amsterdam, Barcelona doing benchmarking together. Buenos Aires staged a regional World Cities Summit with 5 South American cities. Istanbul used case studies from all of our member cities when they wrote their own cultural plan. So loads and loads of collaborative activity, building this expert crack team for culture in cities. And then finally, civic leadership. This, I think, is our big idea for the future, which is to grow a new generation of civic leaders. We want to develop champions across culture, across business, across politics and public life. As Prince Nikolai said, you know, connecting all of these areas in the management and leadership of a city. And this seems to me where the real potential is to bring together culture and sustainability, because we have this common agenda. We all know that cities need both culture and sustainability if they're going to thrive. The Economist, they publish a study of the most livable cities, and of all the 33 members of the World Cities Cultural Forum, only 4 of us make it into the top 10 most livable cities. So we have to ask ourselves, what's the point of building all these great transport systems, fighting crime, if our cities are not livable or sustainable? So our task really at the World Cities Cultural Forum is to work out where both the power and the potential in cities is, and then work out how we can tactically reposition ourselves so that we're moving ourselves and culture into the DNA of cities, away from where it is at the moment, which is the optional extra. For example, we publish in London, the Mayor of London publishes a cultural strategy. It's 300 pages long, and it's a big, fat, nice document. But if we were to get 5 sentences in the London plan, it would be worth more than all those 300 pages. And it's just a question of where we can insert ourselves in the places where there is power and potential. So, Mike, I think it's not at all a forced marriage. I think we have more in common than we think here. There's lots of common ground, lots of similar challenges, huge potential. And thinking about culture as part of this notion of civic leadership in cities is a really powerful thing, because I think it's often artists who can facilitate our understanding of ourselves and the world around us. Often they see the things we don't see. Last night we were over at Oliver a License piece, and in London we recently witnessed the profound power of this, where in Britain we've been commemorating wars through stone statues and long parades for hundreds of years, and last year an artist was asked how he would do this, and he created an extraordinarily powerful installation of 900,000 handmade poppies in the Tower of London. And it's this sea of red poppies enveloped the site, and each one of those 900,000 poppies represented a life lost in war. And the poppies absolutely touched the nation, and millions of people came to see them. And this was a visceral reminder of the pain of war unlocked by an artist. So there's something here, I think, about artists who can jolt us into an emotional connection with each other and with the wider world. I think our job is really just to work out how we can give them the whole city as their stage.
Thank you, Justine. That was really interesting, another huge interesting provocation around the parallels between culture and sustainability, particularly amongst a community that is engaged in both. And I think there's quite a lot of both resonance with what Geordie had said and many sort of lessons that we can pick up and discuss later. Moving very swiftly on, Patrick has now joined us. Would you like to take the mic now or second? Would you, John, do you want to wait? I'll start with John.
Patrick's thinking about it. Thanks. Thank you very much for the very interesting specialist presentations. I'm not a specialist here, so I won't pretend to be one. I don't work in UNESCO's culture sector. I work in the sector for social and human sciences. And my professional responsibility is to run programs on social transformations. However, the question of social transformation is first central in general to the question of sustainable development, and secondly was pretty central to everything that has been said about the role of cities in the future of sustainable development. So there are some pretty close connections there. For that reason, I won't either defend UNESCO against the charge of having not been bold enough in promoting culture for development, nor join in the criticism. I think it's more interesting to focus on the context within which the push wasn't very successful, and we could discuss separately whether UNESCO had any part in the failure to achieve more in the SDGs. What strikes me in these discussions is a few tensions, and I think the tensions do create difficulties in pushing the agenda. One first tension, which is very clear in UNESCO's own work, including in our legal instruments, is the tension between an understanding of culture that is so broad it encompasses nearly everything, and an understanding of culture that is basically restricted to the cultural industries. In other words, the cultural market economy. And you can't really have both, or if you try to have both, you end up confusing people as to what you're talking about. And unsurprisingly, the push to support culture for development as an objective within the SDGs, I think, did run aground on the shoals of that difficulty. Let me just take two UNESCO normative instruments as illustrative in that regard. The 2001 Universal Declaration on Cultural Diversity has a definition of culture, or at least a statement of what culture is about, that is fundamentally anthropological and effectively equates culture with being human. Everything we do is cultural, because that's what kinds of beings we are. Everything from language to dress, to sexual mores, to what we eat, the ways in which we organize our families and our political communities, the kinds of sport, music, and art we create and engage in, everything's cultural. But if everything's cultural, then nothing specifically is. And culture is the ultimate mainstreamed thing that disappears through dilution. And this is clearly one of the risks, because that view of culture is true as far as it goes, but not very helpful in terms of setting an agenda. But conversely, the focus on the professional cultural sector, for instance, with arguments that are very popular even within UNESCO, to the effect that culture can be 7% of GDP. I know people who challenge that figure and claim that it's based on wildly misinterpreted statistics, and that probably 3% would be more realistic. But whether it's 7 or 3, 2 points. First, that's not an awful lot. Hence the fact that culture can get left behind when you're emphasizing housing and transport and jobs and other imperatives, whether for city governments or for national governments. And secondly, that understanding of culture, which is about the people who make a living from it, not necessarily a good one, but at least the people for whom it's a professional occupation, leaves out so much that is undoubtedly cultural. Just to take one example, amateur sport. Deeply cultural as a phenomenon, as any anthropologist would agree. You only have to look at the very different things people do with balls, bats, and boots to see that the notion of sport is probably about as universal as anything else in human culture, and at the same time the practical manifestations of it are infinitely diverse. Having lived for many years in France, I know, as everyone knows, as everyone from Britain knows, that the rules of cricket are impenetrable what could be more cultural? And yet this isn't included within the general meaning of cultural industries. That tension would need to be resolved better in order to have an operational understanding of where, for practical policy purposes, culture starts and ends. Clearly you would want to broaden the usual understanding of culture in terms of professional artistic pursuits and certain categories of amateur activities closely connected to them, for instance, through the training and education activities of professionals. But at the same time, if you extend it as far as anthropologists would, you end up with nothing that policy can actually get a handle on. Secondly, a major difficulty also in framing the Sustainable Development Agenda is the relationship with culture, however exactly you understand it in those terms, and social inclusion. The fact that it is very easy to show, and there are shelf loads of sociology on the subject, that cultural policies designed to promote equitable access to cultural goods tend to produce the reproduction of socially segmented and differentiated access to cultural goods, on average. Which means that, again, and this is a political point, as you said earlier, it's very easy for culture to lose out in those debates when it is seen as elitist, to use the standard tabloid phrase. The point being not that culture is elitist, nor that it inherently isn't, but the constructing an idea of what culture is about that would allow it to escape the trap of having to choose between elitism and populism is trickier, perhaps, than it is sometimes felt to be, or at least as tricky as it is often felt to be, and hasn't been adequately answered. And third, the connection, even though we probably all agree in this room that it's a very close one, between culture and the environmental dimensions of sustainability has not been sufficiently made in public debate. Having tried to do this within the framework of UNFCCC COP just this very week, I can testify as to how difficult it is. On Tuesday, within the context of UNESCO's Management of Social Transformations program, we ran a series of events at Le Bourget, at the COP site, with artists. We had 3 artistic encounters with 3 very different kinds of artists, each both showcasing specific work and engaging in discussion about what that work meant for the broader question of how societies could deal with climate change. And it's very clear that there is an audience for this, but it's a fairly narrow and specific audience. Most people in the COP universe don't get the point. For them, climate change is a primarily technical problem that needs primarily technical solutions, whether they're about technology or trade regulations or taxation. They're always techniques. Whereas what we're trying to push through our programs, and Patrick will probably say more about this because this includes some things we've done together in collaboration between the Ministry of Ecology, the Muséum d'Histoire Naturelle, and UNESCO over the past few years, is promote the idea, as you were saying earlier, that imagining the planet, the future, social relations, the nature of our natural interdependencies is crucial to making sense of them and to responding to them. In other words, far from being simply a technical problem, climate change, like other major environmental phenomena, loss of biodiversity, freshwater scarcity, and other things, is not primarily a problem to be solved, but more a condition to be lived with. And living with it involves imagining ourselves as the kinds of beings that have to live with it, thereby producing ways of living with it, which may not be perfect, which may be very provisional, but which nonetheless appear through the ability to imagine them. This argument is very persuasive intellectually. It still has very little traction politically. And if you put those 3 things together, the uncertain definition of culture between an understanding that's too broad and an understanding that's too narrow coexisting within the same public space, the constant political tension around access and inclusivity, which hasn't gone away despite the best efforts to design cultural policies that respond to the concerns, partly because it's an easy political target, and there are people on a certain side of the political spectrum who just love to point to cultural policies as being the corporatism of the well-endowed, of the educationally well-endowed. And the difficulty of relating environmental issues to the cultural dynamics because of the over-prevalence of the technological paradigm, put those three things together, and it's not really surprising that the traction in the Sustainable Development Agenda hasn't really been achieved. And conversely, I would suggest that trying to address those three at the level of analysis and language first, and then at the level of action and policy design, might be one way of making some progress in this debate. And with that, I should stop. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I feel some abiding themes coming through. Our last speaker, I'm going to need to ask you to be quite quick, I'm really sorry, to give people a chance to ask the speakers, is Patrick de George, a philosopher.
I'm sorry. Thank you. I'll try and be quick, but I'm a bit slow today. I work in the Ministry of Ecology. I am a philosopher by, I would say, vocation and work, and academically speaking, but my full-time job is in the Ministry of Ecology, and basically what I've been working lately on is issues linked to biodiversity and adaptation to climate change. And we have been working, as John said, on different kind of programs that would try to better integrate cultural dimensions into the design of these new policies that we are putting into place everywhere in the world in order to adapt to climate change. And so what I'm going to try and focus on, because I have to be quick and I have to be coherent, is on why is it so important to take into account these cultural dimensions and the work of artists, and to take artists also as directly inside the elaboration of these policies. And why is it difficult also? So why is it so important? Because, as John has just said, first, for example, I'll take an example. In France, we had our first national adaptation plan to climate change put into place about 5 years ago. And the way it was organized was through a segmentarized, compartmentalized approach with the different sectors. So you have health, you have transportation, you have agriculture, you have forestry, and you have biodiversity, and health, and so on. And basically everybody came up and found out how they could adjust the existing policies to the challenge of adaptation. What we realize is that, in fact, now because of the last elements coming from the IPCC reports, and because the quick knowledge that we are acquiring now about the transformation of ecosystems, is that technical adjustments won't be within, I would say, the dominant patterns of production and of thoughts will not be sufficient. What we are facing is transformation. And in order to transform our relationship to the way we live in our ecosystems, the uses and practices that we have on our territories, we need to go beyond the technological paradigm that John has very clearly pointed out, and we need to address how I would say the cultural values and the cultural assumptions that are that I would say the current policies depend on, and how do we do that? And how do we redesign, therefore, not only, how do we redesign, designing a policy for adaptation means redesigning sectorial policies and working on these assumptions that make it so difficult for us to understand the consequences, ecological consequences of these policies, existing policies, on the ecosystems. So that is why the cultural dimension is so important, and that is why the artists need to be working with us, because they're not, usually they are integrated in a way which is I would say on sensibilization, like the last, we say la dernière roue du carrosse, no, the last wheel of I forgot, I'm tired, help me, la carrosse, carriage, okay. So they come at the end trying to try and make things to show to people, like it's like communication sensibilization. And we clearly understand that this is not how they should be creatively, how we should link creatively with them within policy. Because they are within innovation and designing, redesigning, and rethinking these relationships. And so this is how we try to put this into place into our policy. So I know, as I have to be pretty quick, I'll just give a few examples of how we try to do that. So we tried in many ways. Let me see. For example, we have a let me see by which side I could take it. Okay. We have to redesign, for example, the way we circulate knowledge, and how knowledge is produced, how knowledge is recognized as useful knowledge, and so artists make some interesting propositions on that, and so what we try to do first, for example, is to put online a portal with UNESCO and the Museum of Natural History on environmental humanities. We also worked with the Association Coal, who is organizing this event, and we are supporting this event also, to put online an internet site, a platform, to put forward the resources that one can find in the work of artists in order to address sustainability issues and adaptation issues. So this you can find online, it's a resource, it's this platform. Also, we have been supporting work with l'École des Arts Politiques, the SPEEP school that Bruno Latour has put into place in Sciences Po, to try to address the way artists can, to try and show that artists can bring solutions that cannot really be easily found within the compartmentalized, segmentalized approach that we have within administration and bureaucracy, I would say. And also that they also have a capacity to despecialize, because we have a specialization of knowledge, of course, and we are stuck within that because we don't have the whole picture. And as we have to work on transformation and resilience, we need to get this holistic approach. So artists can bring us these kinds of elements through transversal initiatives. And so, for example, with SPEEP, we worked on the culture and biodiversity in the Pyrenees, and we worked on this issue also. Also, in other programs, like the programs that we have for the assessment of ecosystem services, that is ongoing. We have launched a specific approach around cultural services, considering that cultural services are not services, in fact. In fact, apart from recreation services, I would say that apart from what can be quantified, the cultural services, they depend on another dimension than the economic approach. And so therefore they need to be represented in a different way than other ecosystemic services can be represented economically, or maybe cannot. So we were trying to find out how we could define a political representation of these cultural dimensions linked to identity, sacredness, aesthetics, eco-aesthetics, and how we could, and what kind of methodology is here needed? What kind of political methodology for representation of a cultural relationship people have with their landscapes, with their territory? Do we need to put into place so that we can give a voice to these dimensions and not exclude them because we cannot quantify them? So this is also another issue that we have been working with the CNRS and Nathalie Blanc, for example, that was here, I think, 2 days ago. So this is another example of the work we've been doing. But lots of other initiatives are a great inspiration for us. For example, David Buckland's Cape Farewell, bringing scientists and I have to say, bring scientists, and we did something with UNESCO also together around your initiative. Scientists and artists together, not for artists to try and make, I would say, accessible the science, but for scientists also to change the way they ask the questions for research. And this is also very important. And so we hope that maybe if we bring artists also together with policymakers, maybe they will try and they can help them to address differently the way they are configuring their policies. So this is another kind of initiative that we are trying to find inspiration in. Or the black market that was organized in the Musée de l'Homme about 2 weeks ago is another example of how we need to try and find ways to make different ways of circulating the knowledge. So these could be inspirations to renew our modalities of sharing knowledge on territories in order to facilitate freedom of experimentation, in order to gain the knowledge that we need to be able to face the challenges of adaptation. And I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Absolutely fascinating, a really interesting roundup. We haven't got a huge amount of time, but it would be great to get some responses from the audience. If I can just very quickly just summarize. So we had the first presentation from Geordie around actually working very much from the civic space and what we need to do in order to reinvigorate the language around sustainability so that we can engage on that level. Lots of ideas around that, followed by Justine, who described the reality of city planning and where culture gets missed out. And I think there were many parallels with sustainability there. Very provocative from John, who basically said we've got to get a language together, and I think that's come through again and again and again throughout these 2 days. The capacity to articulate ourselves in relation to big political agendas and in big political contexts with some accuracy, although a lot of work, I have to say, John, has been done on that. I think we are all aware of that. There's some of the ambiguities. Sustainability itself is a hugely problematic term. And Patrick's very interesting approach of actually just throwing away the rule book, particularly around policy, and saying how can we actually look at this in a different way. We live in a transformed and transforming world, and we need to do it differently. So would anybody like to make any comments to this incredibly interesting set of provocations? We have one.
Yes. Hello to everybody. My name is Nalini. I'm French. I teach psychosociology to young students. So that means that I spend all my day, every day of my life with the young adults. And I would like to give you perhaps a lateral point of view and say to you that they don't need culture, my students. These young people. I think that they need education. Sorry to the Pink Floyd. That means that they need keys to read this world, who is totally complex, who is totally opaque, I don't know how to say in English, to them. And the problem it's that perhaps there is a point of view on culture which is a little bit elitist in France. I'm talking about France because I'm French. And the answer is that how to manage to give keys to these young people. They have Wikipedia, they have music, they have cinema, and how to manage to give sustainable culture, which is meant for everybody.
Thank you. Okay. Can I just have an idea of how many people have got questions? I might take them in groups of 3s. Does anybody else have a question? One. Any others? Any other questions? Okay. We'll take 3 questions at once.
So Marta Kern, Eco Arts Connections, Boulder, Colorado, United States. From anyone from the panel, and thank you so much. I wish that we'd heard from you from the very beginning, because I think that the questions that you and the work that you're doing is just extraordinary. I mean, in the midst of this extraordinary conference, it's just great to hear from you. My question is, if you had 2 things that you would ask from the arts community including ArtCOP21, in the next 2 years that we could give you or research for you in order to really make the case to insert the arts and culture into all of these different sectors to move the conversation forward about arts and climate change, so it would not be a forced marriage, but a perfect marriage. What would those two things be in 2 years?
Cela fait des années que nous justifions c'est bon? Okay, sorry, yes, true. Sorry, it makes years that we started justifying the investment on culture for economy, sustainable development, environment, social issue, healthcare. We are now posing the issue of culture as a public good per se that contribute to nourish values that go for sustainable development and environmental respect. So I would like to brainstorming among us on the issue of wording. What would be the perfect wording to have arts and culture, public good, as well as education, water, and all the other global public goods we know so well?
Thank you. So 3 questions. One is about the role of that education actually is at the heart of the problem and the heart of the solution, not culture. 2 things from the from the artistic community which would really make the difference to policy and to people in strategic positions. And 3, what is the perfect language to use in order for art to be understood as a public good and to nourish new values? Would anybody like to lead on those questions?
Have a go. I think the 2 things off the top of my head, I think there's lots of common ground in what we've all talked about here, but I think the 2 things would be, 1, get the story straight, I think. I mean, we do quite a bit of work in my department, testing our stories out with hostile audiences, because we all know why we believe in it and why it's a good thing, but when we have to sit in meetings with people who believe the solution is technical, you know, what do you say to the person who says, what's the point of culture? It's a technical solution. You know, what's your story in relation to that question? I think you have to, we've all got to find we've all got to have empathy with different audiences who don't take our view and get ourselves in their shoes and test out our stories and our arguments with those hostile audiences. Which means kind of getting out of the comfort zone would be the second thing. And I mean, in London, for example, as I said, the best way for us to bring culture into our city is through the planning system. And I was talking to the head of a planning committee last week who said, listen, Justine, I've sat on planning committees for 20 years and I've never seen anyone from culture turn up. So I think it's that thing of going, where are those people who have the power? And I'm going to just have a conversation with them. But I think having the story straight to have that create that traction, and then having the conversation would be the 2 things. And I mean, all politicians, they need an ask. That's the other thing. They don't want to chat. They want to know what you want and is it doable. And always good to give them something they can do. They love that.
Just to agree with you, but also to point to the challenge that entails, which is that if you want to desectorialize culture, then inevitably you undermine some stakeholders who have a vested interest in sectorialization. And that's not a criticism of them, it's just a statement of a fact. It's true in other sectors as well. Sectoral policies lock in potential benefits for potential stakeholders in ways that desectorialized policies don't. And I think this is just a challenge for the professional communities to avoid that trap. And as you say, to get the story straight in such a way that arguments that might bring benefits to identifiable professionals are not therefore perceived as self-serving, because they're not necessarily self-serving. the argument about public good is entirely reasonable, but difficult to sell if you're directly benefiting from making the argument. I think this is a difficulty. Often, in terms of producing policy impact, spectacular failures are much more telling and have much better short-term impact than successes which necessarily unfold over time. So if there was one thing that would change the climate, change the environment with respect to policy, it would probably be the ability to point to some really dramatic, unquestionable failures that can be traced to the failure to take account of the cultural dimensions of particular initiatives. There are many, and many have been documented, but they're often a bit canonical, a bit old, and not in the real time of current policy debates. If there's one thing to be done, it's perhaps that. Track in real time how the failure to take account of the kinds of arguments that are going round here actually produces tangible policy failures that go well beyond simply the failure to promote the cultural sector in the right way.
Yes, I would pick up on the question about the two interesting things and I try to connect it all. In order to connect, I would say, culture, public good, and sustainability, and the issues that we should be working on, maybe we should try and work on developing human capabilities for transformation. And I think this is how we would link it: education, public good, and the sustainability and the change that we. Maybe I could frame it that way, because you see, one of the difficulties is that if we have to create new knowledge through experimentation, there are, I would say, rules. They have embedded values and knowledges that are not questioned, that impede this possibility for experimentation on territories. And you need some autonomy in order to be able to experiment with a radicality that is perceived that you need because of a radicality of the changes, of environmental changes that we are facing. So how do we politically secure this freedom for experimentation? How do we identify the obstacles in our, I would say, political and economical organization to this autonomy for experimentation? How do we peacefully, when there are resistance, manage to subvert, prospectively, I would say, subvert existing norms in order to bring new norms or new possibilities to emerge? How do we do that? And this is something I think which is central. It's political freedom for experimenting here, or human capabilities for transformation, needs this kind of autonomy. And I give you an example of a kind of work that we were confronted with on these issues, is the kind of work that we led with derelict lands, lands which are abandoned, or which are produced by, I would say, the urbanization or the building and constructions of a territory. So these lands, people tend to try and do things, and they do innovative things there, because they're totally open to all possibilities, because they are outside of all functionings of all function in the system. And these people who make propositions on these lands, these inhabitants on their territory, are confronted with, I would say, the resistance of existing authorities, because sometimes they are misunderstood, sometimes things are considered disturbing. And so if this spontaneous experimentation on derelict lands, which is also a resource, is also facing strong political resistance. And how do we manage to pacify these conflicts? And so this is an issue. We have a site online that we supported also, the Laboratoire du Dehors, laboratory of the outside, of the outdoor, meaning trying to work out of the box, and that tries to enlighten these kinds of issues. And so you can have a look also on this concrete example of these issues.
In 30 seconds, no, the three questions were extremely good. And to summarize, perhaps I could say that cultural policies should be able to gently push the cultural sector, the professionals, the institutions, to have a real people-centered approach, to involve citizens actively in the production of culture. Because, of course, culture is a public good, and we all know that. And this is not a new narrative, but we cannot convince anyone else that culture is a public good when it is only, say, experienced by 20 or 25% of the population. So unless cultural policies move to become people-centered policies, or cultural actors, professionals will become more marginal to the sustainability debate.
Just one word I never heard before in our meeting is, what about the animals? I think it's very important to think about the animals. And when you speak of education, why we have to learn our children who like the animal to like the robots and to like the machines? Sorry.
Thank you, Prince Nikolai. Really well put. Thank you, everybody. I think we have run out of time. If anybody has got questions, though, I think it would be worth sharing them, perhaps informally. Very stimulating session. What we will do now is gather up all of those talks, but also try and draw together some of the themes. We'll be having a break now, and then we'll be coming back. We will be doing some work on the pledge. That's right, isn't it? 5 minutes, and then I think we're all free, aren't we? Perhaps, Maria, you can say what's happened.
No, maybe, so yeah, we will change speaker. We will thank our speaker here, and we will have like the final wrap-up for the professional workshop with different, like our different partner, and also Sacha Kagan, who is the general rapporteur for this session, for the overall professional workshop. So maybe we thank you very much, and hopefully you can stay as well with us. I mean, even though you have a very busy schedule, I guess, with the COP21. And we just need a few minutes to switch, and to thank you again very much for this very interesting session.
Sur la grève, oh, un peu d'humanité, un moins de béton, plus de trêve, une vie de qualité.
Hello, sorry, we will start. We will start the last session, the wrap-up session for the professional workshop within the scope of ArtCOP21. Oh, I love that. Hello, welcome again. So we have until about like 5 p.m. like to come up with this conclusion of the professional workshop. And I mean, it's conclusion, so it's somehow to come to an end, but it's also a beginning for a new type of ideas and collaboration to be further developed. I will be here more the passer of the mic, and maybe come back with some comment, but we will first have the comment and maybe some critiques as well from our general rapporteur Sacha Kagan, who followed the 2 days of the professional workshop with us, and maybe you can share with us some of your remarks and also like some maybe idea for this final page here.
Thanks a lot, Marie. So, of course, this will be situated knowledge. As Donna Haraway said, it's not going to be some objective summary of everything. So please bear with me, and don't throw apples or oranges or tomatoes. So we heard, especially yesterday in the morning, about culture as a 4th dimension of sustainability, which was interesting, not a 4th pillar or 4th dimension from the Danish Cultural Agency. We heard about culture as a foundation and socle, as the French Haut Commissaire from the Ministry of Culture, Haut Commissaire for Sustainability was mentioning. We heard also about the necessary integration of cultural policies with other policies, as for example, the Vice Mayor of Angers was also illustrating very well. We have also here, especially, several approaches which are coming together in this meeting. I will just mention two, but there's many more than those two. Two of those approaches, so one of them is environmental sustainability oriented, and it's passionately being championed by especially Julie's Bicycle and their allies, and they have been doing a lot of good work in the past 2 days, you know, bringing us along or sharing with us about this approach. There's also another approach that we heard just an hour ago from United Cities and Local Governments that Jordi Pasquale especially was championing, which is about cultural sustainability. I think the question here, especially for what happened across the past 2 days, is whether we really reach synergies between those approaches. Not based on some least common denominator, but based on, I think, of course, looking for synergies, but also having mutual critique and also having a self-critical reflexivity on all sides. And of course, it's important to push our different agendas, but not only pushing our own agendas from the different organizations. Of course, many different agendas are laudable and are very good. I'm not criticizing them per se. So, there's been lots of talking about the different dimensions or pillars of sustainability in the past 2 days, but mostly in practice, I saw a fixation with discrete categories of either social sustainability, we heard several times social inclusion, or environmental sustainability. We heard a lot about CO2 footprints, for example. All of those things are extremely important. They are very good to pursue. They are relatively good within their boundaries, but they can also become too sectorialized, too fragmented, and too simplistic. So this is going to point me at one first critical remark. I will have two critical remarks. So the first one is that fragmented thinking does not allow to really think the complex challenges of unsustainable development. Here we need more intersectionality in our thinking and in our acting. So, for example, there cannot be an environmentalist agenda without environmental justice at its heart. This is something that some of the actors showed us, for example, from Colombia, with some projects we heard about in the past 2 days. There can be no sustainable economic model without starting to imagine the end of capitalism, as was mentioned several times by several speakers, and without a consideration of a cultural economy of the commons. And there can be no sufficient understanding of ecology without also at its core a queer ecology, a denaturalizing of nature. So we heard also lots of things, I'm just going to mention some of them. We heard from our British colleagues that art enriches the language of science, that the art sector can make the impossible possible as an innovative professional sector for environmental sustainability. We heard from the Pistoletto Foundation about the symbolic power of art and about art as interventionism. But art also does much more than that. It opens up to culture as life, so this wider anthropological dimension that was mentioned just before by the UNESCO guest speaker. Culture as life is indeed not just culture as a professional sector. And this is something that our colleagues from Zimbabwe, from Colombia also reminded us of across the 2 days. And art should also retain a reflexive, a critical quality, having a tension between art, activism, and affectivism, as Guy Japens was remarking also yesterday. Guy Japens from Kai Theater. Awakening our sensibility to complexity, as I myself often write in my different writings, which I'm not going to advertise for. Of course. So rather than agitating simplistic answers, as sometimes some artists also do, and some others also do. So this is about guarding us against politically naive greenwashing, art washing, and other kidnappings of the legitimizing power of art for dubious green economy purposes. We should remain aware that if art becomes mere green propaganda, the way will be short from the necessary and useful practice of, for example, CO2 accounting that we need to develop in an age of climate change mitigation, to, later on, a permanent état d'urgence as we live here and now, and some kind of capitalist post-democracy in the age of climate chaos. So we need to keep this critical capacity very much alive for dangers and problems to come. We've had discussions about behavioral change, but more important than the narrow concept of behavior, I'm talking here like a social scientist, so to say, we've exchanged about the systemic relations between individual agency and institutional innovations at different levels of society and policy. A need for transversal work below so-called silos mentality, as our guest from Taiwan was also mentioning. Working with and from institutional change agents, some people talk about leadership, working also with communities of practice and working across administrative departments, shaping what is often called institutional innovations. But then also involving, for example, the very communal workers on the ground, which are relating, for example, to artworks beyond the cultural sector, as for example, Nathalie Berbet was illustrating this morning very, very well. At stake here is a great transformation in society and not merely behavioral change. We have to remember that societies are complex, adaptive systems, as our friends from ecological sciences say about socio-ecological systems. We need to stress, and we stressed very much the last 2 days, the necessity to work on long-term visions, policies, and transformations beyond the political agendas of single legislatures. This is something that's very hard, but it's something that has to be a goal and has to be achieved, of course, differently in different policy contexts. Another important thing that was discussed is to be aware of publics and contexts, whether it's about reaching out to the general publics in the case of France Télévisions, as we heard yesterday, to professionals of creative industries, or addressing climate change, for example, in Central Asia versus in Colombia, where it has to be addressed differently. A meaningful, inspiring, and reflexive exchange needs something better than, I learned the word yesterday, SDA, sucky didactic art. We also discussed the power potential of creating a critical mass embedding the arts sector into a growing wave of green professional practices beyond the cultural sector and civil society engagements for sustainability. We were reminded that in the face of environmental injustice, the personal is political, and the body is political, especially when forming geo-choreographies and politicizing everyday gestures, reappropriating public spaces. We also came to sustainable business models. We heard yesterday about innovative funding that draws from various mixes of market, public, and solidary economies, often with open source and collaborative systems as guiding principles. Social enterprises with ethically guided public-private partnerships, meaning no BP oil, no Tate model. We heard about ecosystems of practice within this discussion of business practices. This business model actually very much reminded me of the qualities of resilience, diversity, redundancy, self-organization. We also discussed evaluations, needs, but also the risks and the pitfalls of evaluations, and also some perverse effects of evaluations. I think we have to think about it also systematically, to think about the effects of evaluating as a social practice. It's a social practice among others. And also think about the importance not to freeze the arts and cultural transformation forces into some kind of fixed, predetermined patterns. We need sorts of evaluations that are not only quantitative for a part and qualitative for a part, but evaluations that allow open-ended, even serendipitous processes. If we take ecological thinking serious, then some of the evaluation approaches, at least, should be like living organisms rather than fixed tools. This means also thinking of indicators which are not only fixed benchmarks based on fixed linear ways of thinking and explanations. And this brings me now to the final thing I wanted, no, not the final thing, but the final critical remark, the second critical remark I wanted to give, which is that dealing with climate change is of course about mitigation, and we heard a lot about that in the last 2 days, and this is extremely important, reducing greenhouse gases emissions. So don't take me wrong, I'm definitely not wanting to weaken that important aim. However, dealing with climate change is also about thinking more long-term than that, thinking about the climate change that will come, however good we are at mitigation. So this is thinking about what Patrick Degeorges talked about just before me, so he stole what I wanted to say, about adaptation, about building up resilience and preparing for, also prefiguring, as Citrine talks about it, as some leftist people talk about it, prefiguring a continued search process of sustainability despite and in the face of climate change. So, for example, across the past 2 days, I didn't hear enough about how the cultural sector will work on this, on adaptation. And also, for example, how we're going to work with climate refugees and about the issue of climate refugees. It was mentioned today shortly by Martha Wiesmann, for example, but we need to focus more on that. Even François Hollande talked about it at the beginning of the COP21, so we can do better. Then the roles and the missions of arts and culture, if we really think also about adaptation, then it reaches far beyond the communication of climate science, which of course is important, and far beyond the support of mitigation strategies, which of course is important, but there's more than that needs to be done. And I think, I'm not going to repeat, Patrick Degeorges already mentioned several things and roles of artists that the French Ministry of Ecology is, thanks to his leading role, talking about leadership, is doing. So I will just finish with maybe some elements from the pledge, which could be interesting. I'm not sure. It's kind of an open suggestion. And it would start with no universality, but deeper transversality. And what I mean here is that it's about transforming policy, including, but also beyond the cultural sector only. This is about transversal partnerships, transversal networks. We heard many examples, great examples of that in the last 2 days. That should be stressed, should be exemplified, but also should be more further developed. So the pledge, I think, should include some kind of commitment to institutional innovations across sectors, across silos, where, of course, a leading role is to be played by the cultural policy agents, but beyond cultural policy. And I think Jordi also pointed in that direction in his talk today. And in this case, we can see, for example, the work, I think, of Julie's Bicycle and of its allies as one example of this kind of institutional innovation. In their case, it worked a bit the other way around, because they were championing, or they are championing, environmentalist innovations in the cultural sector. And I think this is a very good example of working transversal, but we need to do much, much more of that, because sustainability is about much more than just that, of course, very important aspect of CO2 reduction. So a lot more of institutional innovation has to be developed. I would like us to make a pledge in that direction, or include it in the pledges.
So thank you very much for this very good report, very detailed. And maybe before we go back to, I mean, based on what you share with us, maybe before I give the word to the different co-organizers of this professional workshop, maybe some of the participants want to react on what Sasha just said, or maybe you want to add one key element that you would like as well to highlight based on these 2 days discussion. Is there anybody? I mean, don't be afraid of the camera, nobody is very comfortable. Comment or, yes? Maybe mention your name, yeah.
My name is Carolina, and I represent Rios Vivos social movement in Colombia, and I'm here through Arts Collaboratory. And I found very interesting thinking nature as a queer entity, but I think gender is also something very important, because women basically, you know, we carry the hardest part of environmental injustice. And I think this has to be also written in that pledge as, yeah.
Valeria, yeah?
It's in the name of the group. When we did the exercise during the lunchtime, we wanted to point it out, the issue of the possible conflict of interest. And it is very much related with the institutional innovation. When we bring together different sectors, different actors, that is about setting agenda, both at the political and sectorial level, and especially with regards to financial resources. Then you see that actors start to compete between each other to have this resource allocation. So we are also calling for much more co-construction of public policy and instruments, dialogue between the different level of stakeholders, so local, national and European, regional, international authorities, to work together and set priorities together with the stakeholders and the civil society sectors.
Any other comments or ideas that you would like to share? Now or never? No, it will be. Okay, maybe later. So we will have, I mean, what we wanted to have also after this 2 days discussion, which gather, I mean, all in all, more than 150 people, I mean, either artists, collective, art organization, network, and also policymaker at various level of competency from the national, international, and local level, and foundation as well. I mean, we had a great number also of very interesting foundation, like the European Cultural Foundation, HIVOS, or the Dune Foundation, which were represented. So we wanted to have this wrap-up session as well, coming also from the from the three co-organizers, and also from the co-organizer which worked together, so Julie's Bicycle and IFACA, who worked on this report, the art and environmental sustainability, which was this international perspective on art council and ministries all over the world in order to evaluate to what extent they embed this question of environmental sustainability in the way they support arts and culture in general. So really the basis of this professional workshop was this report. So now we need also to think on the future and what we will do next after this workshop. So maybe Alison and Cholet first, yeah?
But you're a bit sick of hearing my voice, actually, so I'll be really quick. I mean, it's been really fascinating. It's very interesting that it has reflected, for me, a lot of the issues that came up during that research that we developed with IFACA. It seems to me, and I will be very brief, Show's going to go through some of the pledges, catching some of the pledges, but I think probably none of this is going to be anything particularly perceptive, because I think people have been saying this all along. It seems to me that we're hearing the same things over and over and over again, that we need to consolidate what we're doing, we need to come up with a narrative, we need to learn how to present it, we need to develop consensus, we need to develop trust amongst ourselves so that we can leapfrog some of these divisions that we currently have. And I think the job that we've now got to do is to come up with ways that we can do that, robust, real structures. I think there's one thing that it strikes me, that we're in this theatre, and out there are some huge talks, and it really struck home at the last conversation that we all feel passionately that we need our voice to be heard. And there are scientists out there who feel passionately that they have a voice, their voices need to be heard. And that's where the imperative really sits, that we start to come up with a narrative that is actually a dialogue. Because one thing Prince Nikolai said was to put this into perspective, which is the urgency of how, just how serious this situation is. And the final point that you made, Sasha, was about innovation and solutions. And we haven't spoken that much about this during this session, but I think we all feel it in our guts, that if we actually come together as a community, and I think this is the biggest thing for me, we actually come together as a community that stretches across design through to heritage, we have a great deal of solutions to bring to bear. But apart from that, that's probably enough.
Apologies, actually, that I'm feeding back on this, because none of these are my words. So over the working lunch that we just had, actually, the great thing was that a lot of the actions that people came out with to work towards a common pledge are absolutely reflecting what has already been fed back. So the good news is that Sasha's perceptions have been absolutely shared and reflected by how people are starting to articulate ways in which we can move forward. Collaboration has been a very common theme throughout, and there's a strong sense from these actions that have been articulated that we want to find ways to collaborate better, and also across, as has been said already, across different sectors beyond the arts and culture, working in a much more interdisciplinary way, and building that dialogue at multiple levels, so making sure that we're valuing equally dialogue at a local level, at a national level, a regional level where learning can be shared and applied rapidly, and also an international level. So opportunities like these to come together, to share and learn. Yes, not everything we share is necessarily transferable across our different cultural and economic contexts, but there's certainly a lot that we can be inspired by from each other and that we can reflect on and take home. There's been a definite sense that we want this cultural presence to build and continue having a presence at these global platforms to really rise to the challenge that I think was thrown down in the last session, which was how we make culture an equal stakeholder at these kind of global discussions to claim our place as an equal stakeholder in those discussions. And indeed to kind of think about the ways in which we're investing, not just in our own understanding, skills and solutions, but also looking to the next generation and making sure that the way that we're training our future cultural leaders and artists is embedding this knowledge also. Collaborations not just with other disciplines and public bodies, but also business sectors like technology, which are very rapidly developing and also opening new ways of thinking. We've mentioned open source, we've mentioned the sharing economy, we've mentioned the circular economy throughout the last 2 days, and certainly thinking about how we can also borrow business models and solutions and rapidly apply them also within the cultural sector. And then absolutely a focus on language and making sure that we are developing a common language that we can all feel equally, that we can own, rather than getting into some of the more problematic feelings about terms like sustainable development projects, these kind of loaded words for some of our participants. And finally, as Sasha and others have said, really recognizing the complexity of all of these different interconnected issues, from environmental justice, social change, indigenous voices, and cultures related to sustainability. And indeed, thinking about ways in which we capture and communicate the work that we do in the way that Justine was saying in the previous session, how we get the story straight and test it so that we're not just building an assumption that we don't yet have the right tools to make a case for the arts and culture in this, but actually we're looking at the tools that we have and thinking about whether we're telling the story right in a way that is influencing the right people and indeed claiming that place as a stakeholder in these global conversations and recognizing our value in those. So I'm sure there are many, many, many other actions and perceptions that others will want to contribute, and I think maybe we can have another opportunity to throw it out, and apologies if I've missed anything that anyone had written on their post-it notes, but I'm sure this will be a developing agenda and process. So thank you to everyone who's inputted into that this lunchtime and over the last 2 days.
I don't know if anybody wants to respond to that, because really it was... You're all exhausted now. I don't blame you. Well, on behalf of Ithaca, I really think I need to thank Julius Bicycle for bringing this subject to our attention and working on the report with us and really activating the minds of Ithaca members, because by asking the questions, we put it on their agenda, and I'm sure we're going to have many more discussions in Ithaca on this subject. I'd like to thank Cole for having us here and for supporting this initiative, and of course I need to thank On the Move for all their work, particularly Marie, and I'd like actually on that note to just ask everyone to join me in a round of applause. Marie, you're absolutely fabulous. You're one of these change agents that Sasha was talking about, and so are all of you. I have to say, what a fabulous group there have been here, and that's all thanks to you. I'm not going to repeat what I said this morning from my wrap-up from yesterday. I'll just add to it and say that today, the word I've been hearing is time and urgency. And I think it's really brought that home to me. Yesterday, we saw Ice Watch Paris together to see that the clock is ticking, that we don't have time, that if every second 10,000 tons of ice break away from the Greenland ice sheet, for me to touch that ice yesterday and to hear all your stories yesterday really touched me. Now, I came here as an environmental sympathizer, I'd say, and all of you have challenged me and made me an environmental activist. So I'm one of you now. And on that note, I will be going back to Ithaca and I will be pushing them to put this on the agenda at the World Summit on Arts and Culture, which will happen 18th to the 21st of October. I invite you all to come to that and to challenge the fund givers, the national fund givers for the arts. There are many here today. So I have to thank them as well and ask them to help me in that challenge, because I think it's all about leadership. You are great leaders. And I'm going to put the gauntlet out to all of you now and ask you, please, when you go away, try to train more leaders. Push them to become leaders and activists too, because we need many, many more people, given the urgency, many, many more people to get the message out there. So on that note, I want another round of applause, but this time for all of you, because I think you're all fantastic. You converted me, that's for sure.
Yeah, I will ask Lohan for a few words, because of course it's like the main partner and also the initiator of the ArtCOP21 program. And just to recall, I mean, I remember, I guess it was 1 year ago when we had a meeting here the first time with Jérôme to prepare, I mean, just to throw the idea of this ArtCOP21 that you developed. So it's really great to see that now the Gaîté Lyrique has also become the headquarters of the ArtCOP21 program. Yeah.
Yes. So yes, first of all, I'm sorry I wasn't here for all the session, because as Mary said, we have initiated this ArtCOP21 program with many actions all over Paris right now. And actually I invite you to go and see a few artwork we are presenting right now in Paris. Actually, one of them we launched just this morning, that's why I wasn't there, at the Grand Palais from Lucie Horta about refugees, as Sasha was talking about. So it's Antarctica World Passport. So I invite you to go and take your passport for Antarctic and for this universal community fighting against climate change at Grand Palais. And we also inaugurated yesterday a very nice piece of work by Acroy de Narvet. So if you stay in Paris for the weekend, go and see it. But I thank you for all this conclusion and all the feedback from Coal team and all partners team. And I wanted to say that we're going to work on that pledge and that declaration. The first step of it will be announced on December 11 for the final session of ArtCOP21. We have some high representatives of Ministry of Culture and from Ministry of Ecology, and so we hope that it's going to be important to continue, because obviously it's the beginning of something. We are working with that. We have the chance in France to have a Ministry of Ecology involved and conscious of the role of culture in ecological transition, and so we're going to follow up on this international level, and I hope it's going to be we're going to continue to make action together and pursue this first collaboration, and also using the tools we have developed together and to share our expertise and our experiences. And obviously, I want to thank everybody. My first hola was to Marie Le Sourd. We have already had a hola to Marie Le Sourd, where we can applaud again. But yeah, so Marie has set up all the events, and also Anaïs Roche, which is a part of a Coal team, was also worked day after day with Marie to the main organization, and night after night. And obviously, thank you to Julie's Bicycle and IFACA and Nagete Lyric, who invited us to be there today. So thank you to everybody, and see you soon.
Thank you very much, Laurent. Thank you very much to all of you around the table. Any last comment, idea that you would like to share before we finalize? And for once, we are ahead of time. Usually we are late, but this time we are not late, so it's very good. We became better. Oh, yeah.
I just didn't say thank you, so thank you. I know it's a bit, there's been lots of thanks, but thank you to everybody for coming and to the organisers. It has been phenomenal, so it's been amazing. Thank you.
So before we all cry, because it's the end. No, so as I say, the end, but it's also a new beginning. And no, I just wanted to say as well that I don't know whether Jérôme is here, the director of La Gaieté Lyrique, and yeah, so he just say hello. But it's very interesting because you want to say something, or it's very linked also to what Diane say about you, your feeling, and Ifaka's feeling as well. It's how you were even more convinced to continue to work on this issue, and it's also what you just share with me. I mean, like to host the ArtCOP21 program it's just also the beginning. It's really a conviction also, I mean, as part of your organization to continue to work on this issue and also with the artist community. So maybe you want to share something about that.
Yes, thank you very much. Just to thank you for being here, to hope that it will not be the end, and as you said, the beginning. I didn't assist to all the meetings, but I just heard something about the genders and queer culture, and just to tell you, to show you how we can involve ourselves, and in the same, maybe the same fight. We organized a festival called Queer Festival, Culture Festival, to show that different people has the right to have to express themselves and to express their identity. And so this point is linked to climate also, because it's a way to hear the world, hear the differences, and we fight for that. At the beginning, in my introduction, maybe you remember that I insisted that a place like La Gaieté, and I think this is a responsibility we have, all of us, is to link and to make the people not to stay in their specialities, but to dialogue. And we have to try to design what is occurring today and to try to understand better what is occurring today. So it's quite abstract, but we do it every day with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jérôme. I feel bad that you're... And I have to say, you have also a great team to work with. I mean, it has been really fantastic to, I use like English word, like fantastic, yeah, to work with your team and to work with La Gaieté Lyrique. So thank you again very, very much. And yeah, I guess without further... Oh, okay. Fine, we still have 10 minutes, so it's amazing, you know.
Let's fill it. I just want to say this one, I just want to say it's been so extraordinary. I want to thank everybody. Also, it's just amazing. I just want to say this one image from Winona LaDuke, who is a, I'm saying with a French accent. She's actually, she's a Native American in the United States, a political activist. She ran for vice president with Ralph Nader at one point. And she said, she gave this metaphor, which I think is important in terms of the value of the arts and what we can do, hopefully, to create a new world. And she said, it's as if we're on a raft and we all know that we're drowning. She said, if we could just see another raft up ahead, all of us, even those of us who can't swim, would jump into the water and make our way to that new raft. Help me build that new raft. And I feel like that's something that the arts can really be important in doing and imagining us. So I just want to thank everybody and to think about that new future. That's all.
So thank you very much. So in terms of direct follow-up, I think we will work, I mean, as we say from the start, we would not come up with a final declaration that we will sign, but we needed like this point of argumentation to recognize the leadership of the cultural sector as far as arts and environmental sustainability are concerned. So I think we have good point to share either in the declaration which will be made next week here, I mean in 1 week to finalize the ArtCOP21 program, and also it will be the end of the COP21, hopefully with some positive result. And after we will of course continue to work on this point as well together with the different partners. And as mentioned also, we will share with you, so when I say with you, is a participant of the professional workshop, like, you know, like the documentation which has been shared, the list of participants, and later as well at the beginning of next year we plan to have an index of resources which will gather and collect the different like experiences and website and resources that we mentioned during these 2 days. We still think it's very important to work on that because it's always this question of course of access to resources which can be key in that kind of context. And of course, I cannot end up everything without some housekeeping, no, but some information that I would like to share with you, because otherwise you will miss it. No, but Jérôme told me that there is, I mean, we had meeting here, but it's also an art center, you have exhibition, so you have many things happening, as you could see also yesterday. It was a very busy day for La Gaîté Lyrique, and there was also an opening of an exhibition which is called Paris Music Expo. Club, Paris Music Club, and for those of you who want to see the exhibition, maybe before also like the presentation by Maya and Reuben, maybe just say to Jérôme and we can arrange, yeah, to the welcome desk, and they can arrange for the visit of the exhibition, the desk which is downstairs. Yeah, so it's always good to it's always when you organize like event that you are only focused on the meeting, but it's very important to understand also more the place in which the meeting is being held. And there will be at 5 p.m., if I am not mistaken, an exchange with an artist, which is George Steinman. Yeah. So from 5 to 6 p.m. here. And after, at 6 p.m., in fact, it will be here and not in the resource center. There will be a presentation of the book by Maya and Reuben Fox from the Translocal Institute. So it will be here as well. And we are very happy to have them because they were like key member of one project and network that you heard about, the Gala project, Green Art Lab Alliance. So it's a way to conclude this meeting, but also to inform you of new beginnings and other activities. Thank you very much to all the speakers, all people who came. I mean, I have to say on a more bit emotional way also that I was really, really impressed that all people, I mean, yeah, all people came to this event despite a context which was not very easy in Paris also a few weeks ago. So I have Farey in front of me. We were very moved by the email you sent to us about the event in Paris, like on the 13th of November, and you say like more than ever, like it's time to come to Paris and to share, about, our culture and our experience. So thank you very much, and see you very soon.
Quand en ville le grain se lève, Vent de nerfs agités que s'éternisent les rêves. Dans ma réalité, je veux des balades sur la grève. Oh, un peu d'humanité, un moins de béton, plus de trêve.